Hey, good people. This is Yvette Madison. I am, again, your instructor for this course, and we are going to begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1 in our textbook actually just starts out and just giving us the introduction to professional ethics. And so we're just going to jump right in there and start looking at some common terminology and just get an understanding of the difference between law, ethics, and regulations. So when we talk about law, we're looking at the legal system, and we're looking at legal standards that govern our conduct based on, or I should say, enforced by government legislation. When we look at ethics, our professional ethics is something that establishes our standard based on the profession, or based within the profession that we're working in. So when we're looking at being professionals in the helping area, we have several different organizations that have specific codes of conduct or ethical codes that we follow. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. When we look at this whole idea of regulation, the very important thing that we have to be mindful of is that the law supersedes any code of conduct. So while we may have within our country, we have different regulations or regulatory statutes that various disciplines may follow. Some of them mirror one another very closely. The most important thing, like I said, that we have to be mindful of is that the law supersedes any code of conduct. Now we're going to move on and start talking a little bit about some of the key terms that we'll see throughout Chapter 1, or I should say throughout the entire textbook, and things that we may see in some of the case studies throughout this semester. So the very first term that we see here will be values. Values, ethics, and morality. When we talk about values, if you've taken an introduction to sociology course, you know that values basically are looking at our ideas, our belief system, our attitude that governs the way that we interact one with another on a daily basis. Ethics, we look at our moral perspective, what we, how we develop our character, I should say, how we display who we believe we are. And then the morality, we're looking at what we believe is right or wrong and how we conduct ourselves based on what we think is right or wrong. When we're talking about code of conduct or ethical decisions, we get into this place where we talk about community standards. Now, community standards are all based on or focused on the standard or the belief system within, or I should say belief system with the client, consumer, patient that the worker has in regards to the environment that they're working in. So with the community standards, we're looking at what the client does for the client, what the worker does for the client versus what ethically you are bound to do for the client. When we talk about reasonableness, that ties right into community standards, in that the work that you provide, the instruction or the action that you provide in your service to your client, consumer, patient must be based on a reasonable account of what's expected, the expected behavior within your profession. When we look at this key term of professionalism, we all have an understanding about professionalism, our behavior, our conduct as a professional. Now, depending on whatever discipline you may be going into, whether it is psychology, whether it is social work, whether it is substance abuse, there is going to be a governing body that dictates what your conduct should be like. I'm going to go back a little bit. And that professionalism falls under that governing body. What is expected of you and how not only you present yourselves, but how you represent your profession. And also, I'm going to go back one more time. There's another topic or another term that is covered in our textbook that is missing from the slide, and that term is positive ethics. When we're talking about positive ethics, we need to be mindful of not only the work that the worker does on behalf of the client, consumer, patient, but in a positive light, but also making sure that we are in tune with anything that may happen that could negatively impact our client, consumer, patient, or the outcome of what we're doing. So again, these are some of the terminology and some of the things we want to be mindful of as we go throughout the entire semester. Now we're going to proceed to talking about two different levels of ethical practice. The very first level that our book talks about is the mandatory ethics versus our aspirational ethics. Mandatory ethics is just as it is described, or just as the word says. It is the expected must do, must not do, as far as your conduct and your behavior as a professional. The aspirational ethics is looking at exactly as it is. What is it that you, the professional, aspire to do? The good, the bad, and the ugly, but mostly focusing on the good as it would be beneficial for your client, consumer, patient. So mandatory is our must do, must not do. Aspirational is what we would like to do as a professional with our client, consumer, patients. As we go on a little bit further and we start talking about our ethics, we look at two different types of ethics: our principle ethics and our virtue ethics. Principle ethics. Now look at this very last bullet right here. It asks, is this situation unethical? When we talk about principle ethics, this is in your books on page 13. Our principle ethics actually looks at, are we making the right choice? Are we acting in a professionally appropriate manner that we can answer this question, is this situation unethical? Our virtuous ethics or virtue ethics is, again, on page 14 of our text, and we're looking at exactly what is it that I'm doing that's going to be in the best interest for my client. Now, when we're talking about the virtue ethics, I want to refer to our textbook on this. This is on page 14. There are 4 core virtues that our book talks about. And these 4 virtues are prudence, integrity, respectfulness, and benevolence. Excuse me. When we say those 4 virtues, I want you to think about some of the characteristics that you may have been introduced to when we talk about going into the field of psychology or social work. What are some of the characteristics that define you within that helping profession? When we're looking at these virtue ethics, this is what the book says. Again, this is on page 14. Virtuous agents are motivated to do what is right because they judge it to be right. Not so much based on this is what I believe is right, but based on this code of conduct, what is written in this code of conduct, this must be correct. So not based on just my opinion, but following this discipline or following this document that I have before me. The second one, it says, is virtuous agents rely on vision and discernment. The third one, virtuous agents have compassion and are sensitive. Being compassionate towards your client means not so much saying that I feel sorry for, not the sympathy of it, but the empathy, meaning that there is a clear respect for the position that your client may have, client, consumer, or patient, respecting the difficulties that they present before you, and having compassion in knowing that, okay, now it is my job as a professional to try to find resolution to the problem that they are facing, but find it in an ethically correct way. The fourth one is virtuous agents are self-aware. This is something we're going to get into towards the end of the presentation. When we talk about being self-aware, what is it about yourself that makes you your likes or your dislikes that could help you when working with clients, consumers, or patients, or what is something that could hinder you in working with clients, consumers, or patients? So we have that whole idea of self-awareness of who we are. Finally, the last one the book talks about is virtuous agents are connected with and understand the mores of their community, looking at what's going on in the environment around me and what are the standards that are set before me for my clients, consumers, and patients, and having just a general respect of what's going on within that system. Now, as we go on a little bit, we're going to get to this place here in our textbook where we're talking about the basic moral principles that kind of guide our decision-making process. And at this place, we have 6 of them that our book breaks out to us. The first one is autonomy. When we're looking at being autonomous, we're looking at me, the professional, you, the professional, being able to work independently on your own, making some self-determination about what will be in the best interest of my client. Non-maleficence is we're looking at the work that we do, that it is not harmful to the client. And now we really got to think about this, because it's not that we are setting out to purposely harm the client, but sometimes based on our standards and values and beliefs, it may not necessarily coincide with the environment that we're working with. So we got to be mindful that the things that we do, that it is not harmful to the client. And then we get down to the third one, which is beneficence. When we talk about this, we're looking at how are we promoting change? How are we promoting a sense of well-being to our clients? Justice. Well, I think it's fair to say, with some of the things that we see going on in our society today, that there is a strong emphasis on creating this environment of equality, this system of equality. And so when we're talking about functioning under moral principles, we want to make sure that we have that aspect of justice, that aspect of equality for our clients, consumers, and patients. The fifth one, excuse me, that we talk about is fidelity. When we talk about fidelity, this is where we have to be very understanding of the culture that we're working in. We don't want to make promises that we can't keep. The things that we work on with our clients, consumers, and patients must be realistic, and they must be attainable based on our clients, consumers, and patients, what their resources may be and what their environment may offer. So there's a little bit of homework, or I should say a lot of homework, that we have to do in order to make sure that everything that we do is focused on a realistic outcome, an attainable outcome for our clients, consumers, and patients. Finally, the last one, veracity. When we talk about veracity, part of our characteristic as a healthcare professional is making sure that we present ourselves in a truthful, honest, genuine way. People don't so much care about the alphabet soup behind your name as much as they want to know, do you have some genuine concern about seeing me through to the outcome that is going to be beneficial for me, that's going to lead me into a successful outcome. So as we move on a little bit in chapter 1, we're getting into this place where we're going to be looking at different models of ethical decision making. Now, our book does not so much highlight altogether this very first model, the feminist model, but it is one that is very important for us to have an understanding of, because the feminist model kind of falls into the idea of, or the concept of, this social conflict perspective, and always looking at what is going to help establish a sense of equality, empowerment, and get us a strong working relationship with our clients, consumers, patients. This second one, this transcultural interactive model, we're looking at, again, culturally, what is going on for our client, consumer, patient, that I, the worker, may need to get a little more education in, so that I understand and I define for myself what may possibly present as an ethical dilemma, what may possibly hinder me from providing the best service that I can to my client, consumer, patient. This third decision-making model is the social constructionist model. Now, when we talk about the social constructionist model, and this is in your books on page 20, this social constructionist model is always looking at, again, the bits and pieces that come together, how they interact together within the community that we're working with, that are going to impact the decision-making and the outcome of services that we provide for our client, consumer, patient. As we go down through chapter 1, on the bottom of page 20 over through page 22, the book gets into some very specific steps that it talks about what it is we can do as professionals when we're thinking about addressing ethical problems. So I'm just going to name these different steps. First, they talk about identifying the problem or dilemma. Actually, let me go there. These 8 steps: identifying the problem or dilemma, identifying the potential issues to be solved, reviewing the relevant ethical codes. When we talk about reviewing the ethical codes, it is very important, based on the discipline that you receive your certification in, that you are knowledgeable about the code of conduct as required based on your credentialing. So we got to know what those codes are saying to us. The fourth one, the laws and regulations. As I said in the beginning, law supersedes our ethical codes. So we have to be mindful of the work that we're doing. How is that going to be impacted by the legal system? Does legislation hinder us or prohibit us from doing the work that we need to do? The fifth one, we talk about obtaining consultation. You are not going to have the answers to everything. And it is okay to go out and to contact either another worker in the field in a confidential type of conversation, to have a supervision meeting or consultation meeting with your supervisor, just to gain more information and more assistance in looking at the issue that you're working on and maintaining your code of conduct. Number 6, looking at possible or probable courses of action. Again, we need to be mindful that when we're talking about the course of action, these are things that we are doing in conjunction with our client, consumer, patient, not something that we're doing in and of ourselves. This is not a time to be a solo rider, to think that we are the ones that are going to have all the answers, but all of our decisions must be made in this whole process of an informed consent, that our client, consumer, patient is an active partner in the decision-making process. Number 7, we enumerate and we consider the possible consequences of whatever decision it is we make. So we just got to think about what we're thinking about. What does that mean? We need to actually plan out, this is one possible outcome, but now let's look at some of the different variables that could impact that outcome. And those variables that come into play, we have to consider what is another probable outcome. So we just really got to think about what we're thinking about and be prepared to adjust our mode of treatment or our mode of intervention at the drop of a hat, that it would be beneficial for our client, consumer, patient. Finally, number 8, the very last one, we have to choose the best action for our client, consumer, patient. Again, good people, it's not about us, the worker, not about us at all. It's all about what we can do to empower our clients, consumers, and patients. Now, this last part of chapter 1, and this actually begins in your books on page 24. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. This begins in your books on page 33, where there are there's this listing of various professional organizations that give you information on the code of conduct. In your weekly folder, there's also a page in there that provides the links to some of these organizations that I encourage you to take a look at these organizations, depending on the discipline that you want to go into, and research their code of conduct for their profession. Finally, now jumping backwards, in your textbook, starting on page 24, there is a self-assessment. And that is something that I don't want you to overlook. I want you to pay attention to that self-assessment, because that's something that I'm going to ask you to do as your assignment for this chapter. I need you to really think about who you are and what your current thought process is. There are no right or wrong answers. This is just all about assessing where you are and what you're thinking about as far as in how you think or how you perceive your actions ought to be when you're talking about working within the helping profession. This is not so much something where we're having a Dr. Phil moment, because we're not, but it's just that you take this opportunity to really think about what you're thinking about and then address the questions that are on this self-assessment. All right, good people. So this was a brief overview of chapter 1, with this just being an introduction to the professional ethics. So in your weekly folder, there's some information, again, on the various professional organizations. There are your discussion post questions, as well as your assignment for this week. All right, so enjoy reading this chapter. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact me by my instructor information that is on the course main page. All right, good people. Love, peace, and bacon grease, and we will see you with the next chapter.